This podcast is brought to you by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. By the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve. And by Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be. We welcome you back to another edition, another season of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we are back, baby. We are back for another great season. My name is Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church here in London, Ontario.
He's Vicar number one, and I'm Vicar number two. My name is Kevin George. I am the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, Ontario. That's the first time I've said that on this podcast.
Yeah.
New gigs. Yeah. Who's the other guy? We haven't seen him in a while.
I'm Ian. I'm the producer of this podcast and the person who sends it out to your ears. I hope everyone's doing well out there.
Where's he been? Rob, where's he been?
I have no idea. He's it's not that Ian hasn't been part of our podcast for the last couple of years. He's been off of our schedule. So,
yeah.
And of course, far be it from me and Kevin to change our schedules. So, but no, things weren't syncing up really. Ian couldn't be here to record, but we're glad you're back.
Thank you. I've been doing my major in pop music studies, and it's been very fun. I'm back in school, so another couple of years.
Tell our listeners where you're doing this major in pop music studies.
At Western University.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Very fun.
So
I smell a pop music quiz one day coming up.
Absolutely. Hey, listen.
Or maybe some pop music trivia.
How's the are you recording still? You getting some recording out or what?
Yeah. So in a while in there, the program that I use to edit audio and all this stuff stopped working from June until November, even I think it was early December of 2023. I did not have a system to record music, and it was not a great time. But there's new stuff coming, even with that delay in stuff. So watch out for that. It's gonna be fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, looking forward to it. Good for you. Good for you. We're glad to have you back in person.
Good to have him with us. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's so handsome. It's better he's with us because he makes us look, I don't know, younger somehow.
You know what?
It goes up a whole notch, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
High five.
Shout out people who are watching. Hello.
That's right.
That's right. All right, guys. Well, as I say, it's a new season for us. And can you believe it? This is our 10th season. I don't even know if Cheers went 10 years. Did it?
I don't know. I
don't know. But this is pretty good.
9. I think they went 9. I think we're 10.
Did they go 9? I think we beat them. 10th season of the Vicar's Crossing. So today we're excited to kick off our new season with special guest Ali Henny. So let me tell you a bit about Ali. Ali is an author, and those on YouTube can see the book that Kevin's holding up. Ali is an author and activist, and the book we're going to be talking about today is I Won't Shut Up, Finding Your Voice When the World Tries to Silence You, an unvarnished perspective on racism that calls Black women to find their voice. Ali is a speaker, advocate, minister, and vice president of The Witness, a Black Christian collective, an organization committed to encouraging, engaging, and empowering Black Christians toward liberation from racism. And she is an incredible woman, a great guest for us to kick off this season. And we're glad to have her here, especially we're in February now, Black History Month. So really honored to have her with us. So we'll chat with Ali coming up in a bit.
That's fantastic. I have to admit, I was taken by the title, mostly because one of our other guests, we know, John Marsh, I think this is his motto. I won't shut up.
That's right.
But that's not what this is about. This is much more serious than that, and I look forward to talking to Ali about it. Before we get into welcoming Ali, though, we wanted to take some time and acknowledge that the lands from which we record this podcast are the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples. These are lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. These lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of our land and vital contributors of our society, and people with whom we wish to walk the two-row path towards reconciliation. And I hasten to add as well that sometimes the recitation of these can be just to say something and get it out of the way, but we certainly want to acknowledge the ways that we benefited from the injustices, the white supremacy, and we'll hear lots about that from Ali in terms of racial relations, but also to consider ways that we can do our part towards reconciliation, whatever that might look like.
Yeah. Want to take a moment to thank our sponsors here in the Vickers Crossing. We're quite appreciative that our sponsors continue with us and take part in this journey. First to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And Dave Mullen, thank you so much for sticking with us and being such a great support on our podcast. So we thank Dave and the staff at A. Miller George today.
Yeah, he's a good guy. In fact, he came in here the other day. I'll say this before I do my bit. And he brought me in these tickets for the London Spitfires, or the London Knights versus the Windsor Spitfires, Robbie.
Oh, nice. Very good.
And we're auctioning these off for the St. Paul Social Services for the food program here. So if you want to bid on tickets so we can go and watch the Knights play the Windsor Spitfires, which used to be our team when we're down in Windsor, right? We can.
Yeah, still, I got to admit,
still our team.
Still our team. It's hard to get rid of it all. Yeah.
It's in there. It's in there, man.
It's in there.
So anyway, and along with them, we're thankful as well to the Diocese of Huron. The Diocese of Huron, which thanks to them, Rob and I have had jobs for the last number of years. But it's a community where families and individuals from Windsor, speaking of the Spitfires, to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan, and even right here in London, come together to worship and serve. So our thanks to Bishop Todd Townsend and all the folks at the Diocese of Huron.
Absolutely. And to round things all off, when you're in hockey, you like might get a little bit messy. We want to say a special thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And Trisha Lister was a wonderful human being who hooked us up with that. So thank you to them over there. Any cleaning needs you want, they're there.
He speaks from experience.
Naturally.
Naturally. A national experience.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, here we go. Season 10. Are we ready to get at her?
I think let's as they say on Letterkenny.
Yeah.
Pitter patter. Let's get at her.
Let's get at her. Ali Henny is our guest, and I believe she's in the waiting room. So let's bring her in.
Woo.
And Ali Henny is here, and she is joining us on the Vickers Crossing podcast to talk about her book, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other stuff. And Ali, we are so happy that you could be here. There's the book, I Won't Shut Up, and you're in Chicago. So welcome to London, Ontario, and beyond. We hope you're doing well, and thanks for being with us.
Well, I'm glad to be in London and beyond. I've not yet been to Canada. I've been to other places, but I've not been to Canada yet. So I'm glad that at least my voice is going there, and we'll definitely have to pay a physical visit sometime.
That sounds like a plan that should happen, Rob. We should just
I think so.
The Vickers Crossing brings Ali to London, Ontario, the other London. We can bill it as Ali goes to the other London.
That's right.
Hey, yeah, that's big. That's big. So because I've been to the main London.
Yeah. Well, we call this the main London.
Well, no, that's true. That's true. Yeah. the other main London, I've been there and was the sickest I've ever been in my life.
What?
I got some kind of I had some kind of it was probably pneumonia. It was either a mild pneumonia or like a really bad bronchitis, but it was horrible. I should have gone to the hospital, but I'm an American. And so
right.
I didn't think that if I went to I thought that if I went to the hospital in like someplace that wasn't America, that I was going to have to like pay my whole entire like life savings, which wasn't very much at the time because I was like 20 or something like that. So I thought this is going to be like, I'm going to be paying on this medical debt for the rest of my life. I didn't realize that places like
the developed world has health care.
And Canada has health has health
Oh
care.
yeah.
So,
Exactly.
Because if I had known, I would have been right up there.
All over that.
Would have been all over that. So I just stayed in a hotel room and suffered
in misery.
And in misery.
You'd have been like 1,000 Tylenol. Pip, pip. Let's go. Bring
Yes.
them on. Bring them on.
Fill my suitcase.
Yeah.
I'm bringing them back to America.
Yeah, I definitely would have, but you live and you learn. But definitely,
true.
if I go to London in Canada,
Yep.
and hopefully I won't get sick, but if I
No.
do, I will definitely take advantage of
No
y'all's
sickness, but
healthcare.
you can be assured that we
Yeah.
will hook you up with the best doctors.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but we'll have to think about ways that we can make this happen. Look, I just so enjoy is not the right word because this is a tough book, but I really loved your book. I loved your book because it's such a deeply personal book. And that meant for me, I just could not lay the book down. Your honesty and your willingness to put yourself out there is really inspiring. You write in the book, I'm just going to quote this a little bit and then have a question for you on the other side. You say, I refuse to allow the world to force its harsh, dishonest, and out of touch definitions on me, which is why I'm determined to tell this world exactly who I am. By telling the world who I am, I aim to defy the stereotypes and limitations that society has tried to place on me individually and on Black women collectively. Engaging in self-definition is how I resist the lies that society has tried to tell on loud Black women. I am a loud Black woman. Can you say more about what that lived experience is, especially as it relates to, like you write about white supremacy in there and about how that impacts even people who are Black in other races and all of that stuff. Like you really lay out in the beginning of the book just how difficult it can be when you're being told you can't be who you are.
Yeah, I feel like that as a Black American woman, the legacy of enslavement, the legacy of colonization, of the genocide of indigenous people, plus also enslavement was also another type of genocide that was going on. It's left the culture with like these ideas about whiteness, about the superiority of whiteness, about the supremacy of whiteness, about and a lot of, and it's lies about, well, white people are smarter, or white people or have more or better culture or whatever, because of the violence of all of those injustices. And so then that comes to bear on Black people, on Black gender minorities, on Black women, and on other people of color. It comes to bear on us in these kind of almost these vicious stereotypes, these vicious ideas about who we are as people. And so one of those vicious stereotypes is this trope of a loud Black woman, who's loud, and in her loudness it's like there is kind of like a perception of a bad attitude, in that there's a perception of someone who is lazy, someone who is trying to live off the government, as it were, for various reasons and modes. And so all those identities and many more sort of get thrust upon Black women, get thrust upon people of color. And so in that excerpt that you read, really what I'm getting at there is that I am aware of those stereotypes. I'm aware of some of the ideas that people hold about Black women. And I am taking certain aspects of them, and I'm owning it, and not owning it in a way like saying, oh yeah, you're right, owning it, but owning it in a way that actually subverts it. So to say, yeah, I'm a loud Black woman, but that's not a bad thing. I'm a loud Black woman, and I am proud of that. That's subverting that. But then I'm also taking those ideas in those stereotypes and those definitions, and I'm also saying, I also don't fit those things. And I'm not the stereotype of a welfare queen. I'm not the stereotype of this loud, overbearing Black woman who is hard to get along with and all these other types of things. Like even in my assertiveness, even in my pointedness, in my directness and whatever, I'm not those things. So it's like I can choose, I can define who I am, and I'm not going to allow whiteness then to say, well, this is who you are because of your experience and because of what you look like.
Yeah. This is who I am. Live with it.
Exactly.
Right. This is who I am. And in our parlance, beautifully, fearfully and wonderfully made, beautifully made, beloved in God's image. A little further in the book, you write this, and here's another excerpt for our listeners. You say, understanding injustice as a constellation of harms allows us to pull it out of the realm of individual experience and recognize its broader impact on everyone. Individualism and toxic positivity minimize humanity's interconnectedness and blocks us from fully perceiving the impact of injustice by reducing its individualized misfortunes that can be rehabilitated into teachable moments and triumph narratives. Freedom, you write, becomes dependent on an individual's ability to overcome adversity, but that ain't real freedom. A turd dipped in gold and studded with diamonds is still a turd. That may be my favorite line from the whole book.
Highlight.
Do you two concur? Is it? I mean, what?
Oh yes, very much so.
A turd
I said
dipped
highlight.
in gold. Yeah, a turd dipped in gold and studded with diamonds is still a turd. Freedom isn't a reward issued to those who are able to withstand mistreatment and endure hardship. You write, it's our birthright and shouldn't have to be earned. Positivity isn't what sets us free. It's the truth that sets us free by forcing us to confront the ugliness and brutality that we see in the world. American society's addiction to rugged individualism and toxic positivity has resulted in an inability to name and adequately reckon with injustice. Wow. Like I read that about like that paragraph. I just kept going back and saying, man, this is really like, oof. Because I think it's true of us in Canada as well. We see a lot of this. But can you say more about this rugged individualism? And it's really sort of consumer driven in a way, and this toxic positivity. And I was thinking about it as well, even in terms of the narratives around, American exceptionalism. It's like, look at us, we've got it straightened out, right?
Yeah. So like, one of the images that comes to my mind whenever I think about rugged individualism is the stereotype of the white American cowboys. It's John Wayne, even in some ways, like that whole archetype. So just, an aside here, a lot of the American cowboys were actually Black. And they were Black men. And they did a lot of things that were kind of like just erased from history, and it became like this thing that was associated with whiteness. But that's an aside.
More erasure, right?
Yeah, exactly. But like this whole idea of like, I think about like John Wayne, that for a really, I mean, still in a way, but for a long time, John Wayne was like this epitome of like masculinity, of, a guy who could just go and get stuff done. So whether he was playing like, I don't know, I should know more John Wayne movies, because for whatever reason my father
we're all too young for this.
Is like, I guess that my father-in-law is like really into John Wayne movies, which I'm just always like, okay, I guess, like, whatever. So I feel like I should know more about it. But I think he played like Patton. I think he played like General Patton, and I remember that he's played, like several kind of in westerns and that sort of thing. That's kind of like the stereotypical genre that he was part of. It. It's this rugged guy who's strong, and he can go out and he can brave anything that is handed at him, and it's just this very kind of this very just sort of like rugged and rough kind of trope. And so in the United States, y'all are in America too, so I can't say Americans, because y'all are North Americans. So pardon my vernacular here.
Yeah, it's all good.
But people in the States, that archetype is held up as kind of like the quintessential masculinity. And then within that, everybody else kind of falls into lines and falls into roles within that. And so I think that Western society, even as a whole, kind of tends to be just very individualistic, very I can do it by myself. I can accomplish it through my own blood, sweat, and tears. I'm gonna build this with my two hands, and just this kind of stuff. And Black Americans, Black folks, we come from what people term a collectivist culture. And so there is individualism and whatnot within Black culture, but we very much even see ourselves as part of a collective, and see our actions, see our impacts and stuff as it's part of a collective whole. And I think that whenever you're a person who belongs to a collectivist culture, and you're used to we instead of just me, like, yes, you have your individual sense of self, right? But like, I realize that the things that I do, the things that I achieve, both my achievements and my failures reflect upon not just myself, but upon other people who look like me, where white people don't really have that concept. They don't really have that idea as a culture. And so then what that does is, because white people see themselves as individuals, they see their story as, well, this is my story, and this isn't playing out in an arc of history. This isn't, I'm not fitting, stereotypes. Like, as a white person, like, I'm not fitting a stereotype, or I'm not fitting an archetype, or I'm not the way that I've lived my life, the trajectory of my life, the things that I have seen, the things that I've been given, the culture that I've been handed, the advantages that might accrue to me from that. I see that as the result of my individual hard work as a white person. It was me. It was me again, with my own, two bare hands. I did this.
Yeah.
And whereas for Black folks, it's not quite like that.
No.
And so we see ourselves as, if one person is succeeding, we're all succeeding. Or if somebody else is out there showing out and is doing things that are disappointing, we take that upon ourselves. We're like, oh my goodness, that person, oh my gosh, that person out here acting up, like they're making us look bad. And so we see ourselves within that in a much different way. So then the way that plays in with racism is that white folks don't often realize that y'all are part of a story, and y'all
That's
are
right.
part of a collective story that has been going on this side of the world for about 500 years. And so the narratives, the things, the experiences that you all have is because of a history that you are connected to as white people, in the same way that I am connected to my history as a Black American person.
Right.
And so I think that oftentimes white people just sort of think, well, slavery's over, Jim Crow's over, segregation like isn't a thing, blah 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 blah. Like, what does that have to do with me as a white man in 2024? Well, I never held slaves, whatever. But it's like, but for me as a Black woman, I can see even in my own family the legacy and history of enslavement and of segregation and all that. I mean, it was just my great grandmother on my dad's side was the first free relative that I had. My great grandmother
That's incredible.
on my dad's side. So my two times great grandparents on my dad's side
We're
were
enslaved.
born enslaved.
Wow.
And then on my mom's side, I think it's like maybe my third great grandmother, or excuse me, my great great grandmother was the first one born free, and then like my great great grandparents. And then in fact, something that like hit me recently is that my great great grandfather was enslaved. My great it was my grandmother's grandfather, who helped raise her, was enslaved.
Enslaved. Wow.
And was born enslaved. And she was raised by my grandmother was raised by a man who was born enslaved, and I was in turn raised by her. So it's like we can reach out and touch
Yes,
people
right there.
still. It's
Yeah.
it's right there. You like it's right there. Like, no, I have not seen an enslaved person, but I've looked into the eyes of someone who has looked
That's
into
right.
the eyes of a person who
Right.
was
Right.
enslaved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so but white folks don't want to be, y'all want to
No.
distance
Yes, right.
from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
history. Y'all want to distance from that, from those genocides that took
Yeah.
place. It was,
Yeah.
it wasn't my ancestors who came and dispossessed First Nations people. Like, it was
Yeah.
it was somebody somewhere else. It wasn't
Oh, yeah.
me. And
Yeah.
so all that just, it comes to bear on us then, that whenever you try to dress up white history essentially
Yeah.
in bows and make it look good and whatever, it's way deeper than that. And so the
Yeah.
successes and the failures, we rise and we fall, and it's in the trajectory of history, and not just in a vacuum somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
You write about being silent in the book a little bit, and well, the title, I Won't Shut Up, the opposite of that is being silent, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you write about silence, and in particular how it affects dignity. And I was taken by a little bit about what you wrote about your grandmother, who you bring into the book as well. So I just want to read a little quote from the book about that. You write that when oppression threatens to silence you, you have a choice to make: push
Mm.
back or shut up. Shutting up seems like a viable option until you realize that there's a cost. And when you are silent about your subjugation, it doesn't stop people from subjugating you.
Mm.
If anything, it gives them permission to keep that same energy and to treat you as if you asked to be mistreated. When you push back against oppression, you might pay for it in lost opportunities, broken relationships, and other types of immediate temporal consequences. What you gain, however, is the ability to maintain your dignity. And you say that many years ago you asked your grandma about what the word dignity meant, and she answered by singing a song, the words of which, I don't have the melody, so I can't sing it, but the words of which are, "I've got my dignity to keep me warm."
Mm.
And I don't know if you said, I don't know if it was actual song or something she made up, but it stayed with you. And whenever you're right, you hear the word dignity, you automatically think of the song and how true it is. When you push back against oppression, you're right, you might experience other painful losses, but at least you can keep your self-respect. Allie, I wonder if you could talk more about that. Maybe tell us a little bit about your grandmother and how she influenced this understanding of faith and self and speaking up, because I think grandparents just play such a pivotal role in our lives. It certainly were with me, and those that were fortunate enough to be able to know them growing up really do make a mark in our lives. So can you say a bit more about her and what she brought to you?
Yeah, my grandmother, she was a very wise woman. She had my mom, and my grandma had 7 children, and so she had
Mm.
a few children. She got married whenever she was 15. But so
Wow.
much different time back
Different
then. She
day,
was
yeah.
much different day back then. She was born
Yeah.
in 1921. And so she got married and had 3 kids, and then there was like a 13-year gap, and then she had my mom and my mom's 3 other sisters. So she had a total of 7 kids, two boys, 5 girls. And she was definitely she was someone who worked very hard in her life. She was a domestic for a lot
Mm.
of her life, so she was cleaning white people's houses and stuff,
Mm.
working not just that. Didn't just do that. She worked in factories. She had
Wow.
all kinds of jobs. My sister talks about how one time she asked her, it was for like a school project or something like that, asked her just kind of like, about her life and stuff that she did. And my grandma just rattled off all these different types of things that she did, all these places that she lived, all these different
Mhm.
jobs and stuff that she had, and whatnot. And so she was a great lady. She had a big personality. She was a product really like of her time, in the sense of growing up and living in rural middle America. experiencing the discrimination, having to monitor how she lived and moved and had her being and stuff in the world. And so her world, her life was very much informed by that. And but she also had a lot of wisdom. And I remember growing up, she would, with, I mean, all of us, she raised every single one of her grandkids in some shape, form, or fashion.
Wow.
We almost all of us either like were at her house all the time or lived with her. You know, of course, having that many kids and everything, my family was always every night we would gather at my grandma's house and we would have dinner, and so she would cook for all of us.
Right.
And so I want to say, like, I guess it would have been like 4 out of the 5 lived in the same town that she did. One of them lived, one of her kids, 2 of them whenever I was growing up. My uncles had passed away before I could really know them. But then her oldest lived in a different town, and then her youngest lived with her for a while, and then kind of was back and forth living in Kansas City or living other places, or living in Kansas City or living back home with her or whatever. But we all would get together and she would cook us dinner, and every night we would be in her living room, and the kids, you know, we'd be watching whatever it was on the TV. So we'd watch the news, and then, you know, we'd watch the Cosby Show or the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or whatever. She loved like award shows, like, you know, she didn't even, it was wild because like my grandma would watch MTV with us. So like we would have MTV on. My grandma would watch MTV. She would watch the MTV Music Awards.
Oh, really?
Like she was really like, she was really kind of with it in that way. Like she had stuff that she didn't like, and she would, you know, tell us like, you know, like certain things would come on. It's like certain music stuff would come on that she didn't like. And she wouldn't want us to listen, and she wouldn't want to listen to it or whatever. But people would come over, like family, friends and stuff would come over, and she was a good cook. So people, I'm from the country, so people would bring, you know, like squirrel and fish and that type of stuff, and she'd cook it.
You got my attention now.
Yeah. They you know, they bring raccoon, they bring beaver. Like the one thing that I saw, the one thing that my grandma that I did not see her cook was a possum. One time somebody brought a possum
oh my gosh, really?
to the house, and my grandma
So she had a
accepted
limit.
it.
There was a limit.
She did have a limit.
There was
she
a
had
limit.
a limit. So so somebody brought a possum to the house, and so she accepted it, and then she asked one of the neighbors if they wanted the possum, and so we had to take the possum over to the neighbor across the street. Like one of us kids had to go across the street and stuff. But people would come, and even like, you know, people that outside of our family would come, and they would sit with my grandma, and they would ask her advice. They would ask her advice for things, and she would tell them. I mean, I remember myself, you know, as a kid, you know, having issues with friends in school, but even my cousins, my mom, my aunties, my uncles, if there was a problem, they would go and they would talk to my grandma, and she would listen, and she would give them advice, and people would go on. So she was very, I definitely miss her. You know, I talk about her a lot to my kids, and there are times I kind of try to keep her alive in that way. But if I see something, or if I say something, like I'll be like, oh yeah, like, you know, your grandma Helen would say this and that, or like, you know, my grandma used to, you know, do this and that, or say this and that. So I really try to keep her alive in that way, because she had a profound impact on my life.
Very much so. Good for you. As we mentioned at the top, Kevin, Ian, and I live in London. We're white people that hang out in London, and we live and breathe most of our time in a white-led institution in the church. And in that, you know, we have to say that we can be guilty of treating racism as a subject that you write about in the book. Racism is something that like we'll revisit from time to time, because it's like this checklist that we have to mark off once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And, certainly making an effort, but like most, not doing enough. And as you assert in the book, trying is not enough. And again, a short bit from the book that I really um, found very moving and important for us to look at and see. You write that well-meaning white leaders host seminars, acknowledge important days. They host seminars, acknowledge important days, write statements, even make sure there are a plurality of skin colors in leadership. And these are often good faith efforts that bespeak a basic level of awareness and concern. And they are, and you put in quotes, trying. The problem with trying is that white people's trying often lacks the level of commitment and substance needed in order to be effective. Trying becomes a hamster wheel on which energy is expended, but forward motion isn't achieved. If we aren't careful, we can end up on the hamster wheel right along with them, chasing the elusive goal of diversity and justice because we settle for white people trying to do right instead of them actually doing right. Really moving to read that, and difficult in some ways too, but that's fair. It should be. Can you say more about that, Ali, and what you're trying to get across with that? Because I really found it
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. So it's not that I'm not speaking against trying to fight racism. You can't do anything unless you try. But trying, and in the book, I'm glad that you did the quotes every time. But I put trying in quotes because I think that I could have even capitalized it. But there were a lot of things that I capitalized in the book that I made the decision to put those in quotes. That it's this thing that white people do, and like you mentioned, it's like checking off a list. It's like, okay, we're gonna make sure that it's Black History Month, so you got to make sure that the church social media page has something about Black History Month. Check. Like, okay, we want to make sure that we have on our church website that we show that we like Black and brown people here. So let's make sure that we have at least one picture of a person of color so people know that their people of color are welcome here. Okay, check.
Check.
We're gonna have the racism sermon that we're gonna talk about around Martin Luther King Day, and then maybe sometime during Black History Month, and then in the United States, Juneteenth is a national holiday now, which I have mixed feelings about. I say mixed feelings. I actually don't like it. But that's a different story. Okay, so Juneteenth, we're gonna have the Juneteenth sermon that we can truck out now too. Okay, check. And so it's all of these things that are done sort of in service of, we're trying to show how not racist we are. But then whenever it actually comes time to fight racism, whenever it shows up, it's like, we don't know what to do. What's gonna happen? Like we don't know. We don't have the tools. We don't have the resources. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We're afraid of doing the wrong thing. So we're just not gonna do anything. And so that trying then, I mentioned, it becomes like a hamster wheel. I've been part of white-led institutions where it's always like, good intentions. It's always, we're trying, we're not perfect, we're not whatever. But really all that really kind of amounts to is, we're afraid of making a mistake. And so we're going to do things that feel safe because we're afraid of making mistakes. Sometimes you even get kind of like the sinister thing that happens where we're going to surround ourselves with Black and brown and indigenous people. We're gonna surround ourselves with people of color that agree with us and that are gonna tell us that we're doing a good job, because maybe where they are at in their own racial identity development and awareness, maybe some of the things that we're doing, that's good enough. The MLK Day sermon, the Black History sermon, and the Juneteenth sermon, and then maybe one other sermon sometime in Q4 of the year. That's good enough. And whenever somebody else comes in and says, actually, you know what? Like, some of the stuff that y'all are doing is racist. Actually, some of the programs, actually, some of the liturgy, some of the things that you're saying in your liturgy, actually, that can kind of be taken some kind of way. Then all of a sudden it's, no, not my liturgy. Like, don't take that.
Don't touch that.
Don't change don't change my liturgy. And it becomes this whole thing that then becomes a hamster wheel, because you're constantly trying. And the last thing I'll say about this really briefly, I went to seminary at Fuller Seminary in California. I didn't actually move to California. I was an online student. I referenced this in the book. But there was a student protest, a student activism movement that happened at the time that I was studying there. And it was around the fact that, like, our curriculum was racist. Our curriculum, they did good enough that every week around week 5 of the quarter, they would have what we call diversity week, where it's all of a sudden, we've been talking about dead white men for the past 4 weeks, and we're going to talk about them again for the next 4 weeks. But this one week, we're going to talk about women. And we're going to talk about people of color, and then we're going to so
right back to dead white guys,
and then we're going to go right back to dead white guys. And so, like, the curriculum often, and those were the professors that, like, actually cared. A lot of times it was just dead white guys. Like, it was just straight up for 9 weeks, nothing but dead white guys. And the curriculum itself was racist. We actually lost Black faculty and staff members while I was there. I think, like, the one tenured Black professor in the School of Theology left. My advisor, who was a Black man, like, literally walked off the job one day just because he got so tired.
Just couldn't do it anymore.
Just couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't take it anymore. He walked off the job. Several, let's say several, it was like 2 or 3 other people left the organization because of that. And so the Black students were real upset about that, because it's like, we're losing our leaders, we're losing any semblance of anybody who looks like us on campus. We're being taught like this colonized curriculum and whatever. So we protested. Well, what we ended up finding out in the course of this is that us protesting wasn't the first time that this had come up. It wasn't the first time since Black people were allowed to go to that school. It wasn't the first time. And it had come up several times. And essentially, the institutions, whether they were conscious of this or not, because your lifetime as a student is, I did my MDiv in 2.5 years, but most people are doing their MDiv in like 4 or 5 years or more. So it's basically like, if they could outlive the students in their lifetime and their life cycle on the campus, then they didn't have to change anything. So we're just going to keep on, we're going to keep asking you what the problem is. We're going to have these meetings. We're going to sit and we're going to look, really sad and nod our heads at the right time and all this other type of stuff, but do nothing to change. And so it's, again, that's trying. That's the hamster wheel and it shows up in the church. People come up and say, like, hey, this is, I'm kind of uncomfortable maybe with this aspect of the church, or maybe there's, I think that we could do more things to maybe that would maybe attract people from these diverse populations into the church. And the church is like, okay, well, we'll have to form a committee and look into that.
We love a committee, Allie.
I mean, that's something I find. Anglicans love
we love our
them a committee. Love them a committee.
Change a light bulb, you need a committee.
Look, listen. And so it's like, okay, well, cool. We'll form a committee about it, and then the committee meets a couple of times, and then the committee decides, oh, well, the church isn't racist. Like, we need to attract more people, but we don't know what to do. And that's the findings of the committee. And then it's like, oh, okay, thank you. And then
I think that's the whole thing. Like, we were talking, or we begin this podcast, we do a land acknowledgement every time, right? Because here in Canada, especially, so much around indigeneity and colonialism, but so much of what we do one at the church here at the cathedral where I am on Sunday mornings. Much of it feels a bit performative. And, so the challenge that I think, when I read your book, I'm like, wow, I'm convicted. Right. And I think that's, for me, the growing edges. I mean, this podcast has been a great gift for us because we've gotten to learn from so many, like, as you would say, y'all, down there and doing what you're doing, because you're truth tellers and you're telling the truth to us. And it's not easy, right? Because, we say these things, but when there's a cost involved, right? When the rubber must hit the road and somebody wants to change your liturgy or anything else, all of a sudden, it's a whole lot of trying and not a lot of doing. And, and I think that's, in the years I've got left in this, I want to be more a part of the doing. And I'm failing, but I'm trying. And I feel bad about trying. Because it's this wheel. I agree with you. There's a wheel to this.
Yeah.
And I actually, as I read what Rob just read to you, that piece about Black folks being sucked onto that wheel. I mean, what a terrible thing we're doing. We're actually perpetuating the same thing over and over again by keeping this wheel going.
Yeah. And, I think that it's not so much, to feel bad about trying. And you mentioned even Black people getting sucked in the wheel. And I think that we get sucked onto the wheel because it's hope. It's like, oh, okay. They're going to change this time.
There's a committee. I got good news. They're going to do a committee.
They're doing a committee. There's going to be a committee, y'all. It's going to be.
I met with some Anglicans. They struck a committee. The world is going to change.
It's good. Things are changing. It's progress. The Anglicans started a committee, and so it's very easy because we get stuck on the wheel a lot of times. And a lot of us are like, we've seen this before. Like we know. I know how this movie ends, but we get stuck on the wheel because of the hope. And I don't think that it's you don't have to feel bad about trying. And sometimes people, because even whenever I was writing that chapter, I was like, man, are people going to be like, and I'm not saying that you're doing this at all, but are people going to be like, oh well, I guess I shouldn't try, and like put their hands in their pockets and just gonna throw my hands up, I'm gonna put my hands in my pocket and go and kick rocks because I guess she's saying that I shouldn't try. And it's like, trying isn't the issue. Trying isn't necessarily the issue. I almost quoted Yoda in this because I was like, I wasn't sure if I was going to run into like copyright stuff or whatever, because Disney's all like Disney Yoda now. So I wasn't sure I was going to go, but do or do not try. And so to me, trying. To me, like trying is its category, is its own kind of category. And the reason why I put like the trying quote unquote in like these scare quotes is because trying really in this context, again, but with my quotes, it really there's no other end or purpose to it other than just trying to shut people up. It's literally like a way to shut people up. Oh, look, we have a committee. Oh, but we have a commission on anti-racism in the church. Oh, we have like this thing. And so you can shut people up by saying, look at the things that we're doing, or look at the ways in which we're not perfect, or, look, well, we've got a Black worship leader, or we've got this and that and whatever. And so it's kind of a way of silencing people. But I feel like that if you are doing, and if that doing is evolving over time, if you can, and not over time as in like incremental change that you have to zoom like way out to see the trend line, like, but you should see a trend line in whatever effort you're making. You should see a trend line. Now that trend line might be you're doing things that are good, and maybe your attendance falls off, or maybe people get upset, or whatever it is. But if there's goals, we want to do this specific thing, and we are hoping to get this specific outcome, and then we are going to work toward this for this many days, weeks, months, years, or whatever. And again, not putting people on like we're just gonna try, and progress is just gonna go and go and go and go and go, and it's 20 years before you have one person in leadership in your church that isn't white. That's not really, you're not really trying.
You're not trying.
Like you're not
not
doing at that point.
Exactly.
You know, it took you 5 years to get a black vestry member. Really. And there's black people, and there's been black people in your church. Not like we had to go and it took 5 years. It took 5 years to get somebody into the church, to get them integrated into the life. Integrated is probably the wrong word to use here, but to get them a part of the life of the church. And then, you know, we voted them onto the vestry, and that whole process took 5 years. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you've got black families in your church, and you've had black families in your church for the past 20 years. But you just now, it's going to take, you're like, oh, you know, we probably need black vestry members. We probably, you know, need black leaders, black committee members, whatever. And then you show up 5 years later after that plan. It don't take all that time. Like it doesn't take that long. It don't take that long. If you got black folks in your church, it takes the next, like literally the next vestry class, the next cycle to nominate the black person.
Exactly.
It doesn't, it literally takes the business. Now, I mean, I feel like everybody pretty much has their business meeting like this time of year, you know, January, February. So it might be, you know, 12 months before you know, you're able to vote a person on. But that's something that's easy. And so that's something that it shouldn't, but sometimes like white folks want to overcomplicate stuff, and it has to be like I'm not sure even what the mindset even behind it is, but it's like, oh, you know, these things have to be handled like, you know, tenderly and this and that and whatever. And it's like, no, like sometimes you just have to do stuff.
Just do it. That's the do, right? Get off the wheel and just do the do.
And just do it. And just do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, not everybody is going to go along with it. You know, I'm not sure what the climate is in Canada with this type of stuff, but you know, in the United States, especially in you know, white contexts where there's a lot of white conservatism, whatever, people are going to call you woke, and people are going to say that you're this and that, and people are going to be like, well, what about the white people and all this other kind of stuff. And you know, sometimes you just have to deal with what, I mean, it's going to cost you something. Standing against oppression is going to cost you something. There are going to be people who can no longer make the journey with you because they are committed to their racism. And you're going to a place that is anti-racist. Well, you can't bring a racist to an anti-racist space like that. Like you can't do, like that person is going to have to become dedicated to being anti-racist. And if they're not, then they've got to get off the train. And that's sad. And that person, you might miss their pledge. You might miss the things that they contribute to the church. You might miss, you know, that you know, they're a great lector, or they're, you know, a good choir member or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think that white folks need to get principled in, well, you know what, if you don't get right, you're going to get left. And so like, if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then we as the collective of white people, we don't really have a collective culture, but we are saying as the white delegation, if you don't get your poop in a group, then we're leaving you. Like we aren't going to, we're not going to tolerate that. We're not going to tolerate racist Uncle Ed anymore. We're just going to say, sorry, Uncle Ed, like, and keep it going.
Ed can't come to dinner anymore if he's going to be like that. And I just want to know if what'd you call it again? Poop in a group? Or
poop in a group.
Yeah. Is that dipped in gold and diamond studded as well?
I mean, it can be, but it's still going to be poop. It's
still going to be poop. That's right.
Well, over to Ian.
Yeah. Well,
Ian,
sorry. There's something I wanted to touch upon as well that I thought was so like interesting when you were talking about like academia, and how there's like the cycle of, oh, if we just wait out these students, then we can kind of keep doing whatever we want to do and not have to like make that change. Like I think that's so prevalent as well. Like I went back to school for another 4 years, and you can definitely feel that like resistance when it comes to things like changing. So I think that's so interesting that you comment of like, oh, just like we'll just wait a couple of years until the new students come in and we won't have to actually do anything with our committee or whatever.
Yeah. Ian's living it. Like he's right in there now.
Yeah. But you write about our obsession with success, and success based on numbers, especially online. And I'll read a quote here, and then I have a question on the other side of it. So you say, our consumer-driven capitalist culture often seeks to monetize justice advocacy. We create unrealistic expectations about what it looks like to be an advocate and what it means to be, quote, doing the work. We think that celebrity and notoriety are stamps of approval of our work. We think that gaining likes and follows means we have somehow made it. The question isn't how big of a platform we can build and how many eyes we can get on our latest thing. It is easy to fall into thinking that our effectiveness is measured by how many people are listening to us, when really the measure of our success is whether we are contributing to good in our community, whatever community looks like for you, in our ever connected and increasingly virtual world. And that's amazing. Like I love that, because not only are we like so focused now on like growing whatever, or especially like sharing posts on Instagram thinking that that's like enough, on your Instagram story being like, oh, this is, look at me go, I have, X amount of followers and I post on Instagram and I'm doing the work or whatever. Can you talk more about contributing in your own circles, and maybe even the process of your book and how that affects your perspective on this as well?
Yeah, so I am not against social media and using social media as a way to communicate, as an effective way to communicate with people. My book wouldn't exist if it weren't for having a social media audience and people following me and engaging with what I say. So I take that very seriously, and at the same time, I recognize that that isn't a measure in and of itself. It is maybe an indicator, but it's not something that, and I think that this is especially even true for white people, that it's not a measure of the justice that you're putting into the world necessarily. Now I think that whenever you get to where you do have a big influential platform, and you're reaching tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, that can start to make an impact, and that can start to make a difference. But most of us on our little Facebook account, on our little Instagram, our little TikTok, our little Bird app, whatever it is, whatever the thing is that we're doing. I mean, most of us, we're maybe gonna see 100 people. Like maybe we're maybe gonna it's maybe gonna reach just the way that these things aggregate reach. It's maybe gonna reach 1,000 people. And those are 1,000 people that can be impacted, and I don't want to discount the value of that, but I think that it's very easy to hit the share button. It's very easy to add something to your stories.
Yes.
It's very easy to repost or retweet or whatever. And for that to kind of be like, oh, look, I'm doing the thing because I'm doing the thing because I changed my profile picture to a Black History theme thing.
Or because people are looking.
Or because people are looking at it, people are seeing it, and people are like, oh, look at you, you are such a good white person because you changed your profile picture to Rosa Parks. Like, good for you. And like that, like it's very easy for people to just kind of mark that as progress. But then even with that, and I think that just talking about this in terms of with people of color, those of us who kind of we're in an era of we're in an era of influencers. And so there are people who are like social justice influencers. People would maybe consider me a social justice influencer. And I think that we can mistake, oh, hey, we're just kind of, selling you this lifestyle of social justice. And like, look, we're kind of influencing you with how woke and how progressive and how whatever we are. That it can all just very much become superficial, and you're performing all of these things for an audience, but then you're not showing up in the world in concrete ways that are helping other people. So, you great, you showed up and you changed your profile picture to Rosa Parks. You did whatever the thing is. The Grammys happened, and so you criticize the Grammys for being white. The Oscars are coming up, and you posted about America Ferrera and whatever, and like, boy, I've done the good thing. But what about in your own community?
Yeah.
What about like, so you're doing that, but what about the people in your own community who are being redlined out of housing?
Yeah.
What about the segregation that might be taking place in your school? What about in your workplace whenever that woman of color who puts her heart and soul into her work gets passed over for a promotion, and some mediocre person, some mediocre white man gets promoted over her? What are you gonna, whenever you hear somebody saying and doing a racism right where you're at, what are you going to do whenever you can't take a selfie or post a trite little saying or whatever? That is where the rubber meets the road. So again, in our ever increasingly virtual and interconnected world, I absolutely do believe that the things that we do online can influence people. I've seen so many, I've received so many testimonies over the years of people even that I like personally know, just me talking about racism over all these years has that influence over all these years. They didn't unfollow me, they didn't unfriend me, that it's made them think twice about certain things that they would have, that 5 years ago they wouldn't have thought twice about. And so I don't want to discount the value of that. Yet at the same time, I think that it can be very easy to be like, oh, well, I hit share on, the cause of the week, the thing that everybody's upset about this week. That has to do with, racial justice. Well, I hit share on it and I said, oh, so much this. And like, but did you really do anything? You didn't really do anything. And there's more that there's more out there for you to do. There's more ways for you to touch and influence and change the world. So we shouldn't sell ourselves short on just, I hit, I reposted the thing, I retweeted the thing, I reblogged, whatever it is, the thing.
Yeah. So I love that, because I think that we can all be capable of that. The other part I like about what you were saying there in this part of the book is the work itself is valuable, right? Like, it's not for somebody else to click or like. Right, like this, the justice sort of work, or the and it's unseen, much of it, right? It's stuff that you do that people will never see, is sometimes some of the more powerful stuff, So I really appreciate all that. The other thing, anybody who knows me knows that one of my pet peeves is everything happens for a reason. I just so loathe that saying, everything happens. Every time somebody says that to me, I'm like, are you for real here right now? like everything happens for a reason, Kevin. Yeah. Well, explain some of them to me, is what I say. When you write a piece about this, you say, I don't believe that's true. And I'm like, preach. I don't believe that's true, says Allie. Some things happen for absolutely no good reason. Again, I say, preach. And, there's no good reason for people who purport to care about us to fail to see us in the fullness of our being and then discard us when we stick up for ourselves. There's no good reason for people to insist on saying, doing, and believing hurtful and demeaning things. There's no good reason for injustice in the world. Instead of saying everything happens for a reason, we can identify the constellation of harms that have led us to this place of grief and loss. Identifying the constellation of harms allows us to do the liberating work of constructing a meaning that gives our loss purpose. And where no purpose can be found, we can still be set free by the wisdom that we have gained. I really, really love this. And I wonder if you could say more about meaning making and about that work of engaging. Why is this way? and coming to understand, because I think that, I think the words "everything happens for a reason" is dismissal. It's, I'll just dismiss it over here at a hand. I don't want to have to deal with the hard truths. I don't want to struggle with the ontological questions that we don't have easy answers for, the existential things that frustrate all of us. It's easier to just, well, everything happens for a reason. Bullshit. Some things are really shitty.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and engaging in a conversation about the fact that it's shitty might actually bring about some meaning. And I wonder if you can say more about that.
Yeah, well, I wrote that chapter. That was one of the more difficult chapters for me to write. Really, the chapter preceding it, and talking about, a spiritually abusive situation that I was in, spiritually abusive, and also racist circumstance that I was in. That one was a hard one. That was one of the hardest ones to write, just to be able to get some of that right, like to tell enough of the story that it makes sense, and you can get what happened out of it, but then also not like getting caught up in a bunch of details that just don't matter, like to the reader or whatever. So that was kind of, and it was just hard because it was emotional. But then this chapter that follows it, it's talking about that, like that loss, essentially recovering from loss, and being able to come out on the other side of something that might feel like a profound loss, because there's an aspect to which, because I'm talking about racism here specifically, and something that I don't think that we talk enough about is that standing up against racism often comes with a cost, and you often accrue losses because of it. And I mentioned that earlier, that you might have to say, racist Uncle Ed can't come to dinner anymore, and like that's like you're drawing the line there. But for people of color, for Black folks, whenever we stand up against racism, and we're doing so in white institutions with white people, with people who purport to love and care about us and whatever, we're taking a huge risk. And sometimes that risk pays off, and people see us and they realize, oh, like, I know her. And she's my friend. She's somebody who attends my church. She's somebody who I work with, whatever the situation is. And you see me as human. And then you realize, like, ooh, I've been uncomfortable with the fact that this person's Black. So I just have ignored it. And so in doing that, I've ignored a lived experience and a perspective on life completely and utterly different than mine. And people recognize that, and so when they start to whenever they're called out on it, they start to behave differently, and it can be something that is a moment that's hard, but then it produces change in that person. But sometimes, and more often than not, people don't do that. People get mad. White folks get mad. They lash out. They reject. They do all these types of things that then, like, I'm putting my neck on the line, coming out and telling you, hey, you did racism. Like this thing, this institution, whatever it is racist. And then you pull the rug out from under me by not acknowledging it, by being defensive, by fighting back against it. Well, then I've lost my friend, or I've lost my place of worship, as was the case. As was the case that I write about in my book. You might lose, you might lose somebody that you valued. You might lose a babysitter, or you might lose a relationship with a professor, or whatever the circumstance is that pulls the rug out from underneath you. And so then you have loss. So then I think being able to make meaning out of that loss, because it's not, well, everything just happens for a reason. Because again, like it just doesn't. Some stuff just happens, and there's no good reason. Like there's none at all whatsoever. It happened, and it was awful, and it was terrible, and we grieve it and we lament it. And it's not like there's not any grand scheme to it. It just sucks. And we just have to deal with that. But I think that meaning making is important, because instead of being like, oh, well, this happened for a reason, which you can say, like, that's maybe a roundabout way of making meaning. I think that meaning making is intentional, in the sense that you are evaluating the loss and you're acknowledging that it's terrible, but then you're going to find some way to make to make beauty from those ashes. Essentially, you're going to find some way. And sometimes there's no like deep profound meaning to it. Again, it's just that sucked. And and sometimes the meaning is like that sucks, and now I know that I'm not going to ever do that again.
Right.
Like
the meaning could be, I just hate injustice.
Like
This
yeah,
is
like
this is
I hate
unjust and I don't like it.
the meaning could be white people are racist.
That's
and
right.
you have to take that meaning and go on with it.
Yeah.
But sometimes the meaning is something like, and something that I've tried to do in my own life is see, you know what? Because it was kind of this weird kind of parallel thing that was happening as I was writing the book. So I actually started I Won't Shut Up. Those first words that you see whenever you open up my book were some of the first words that I wrote after the incident that happened in like chapter 14 or 15 or whatever it was with the church. So I had sat down, I was angry, I was hurting. I had just it had been, you know, a few weeks after I had left, and I had already intended to go and to write, but I was really feeling the burden of that loss. And so that first those first words that you read, that first like introduction, the overture, most of that was written in me sitting down and processing that and just what came out of me from that. So then you get to the end of the book. And so by the time that I'm writing those words, that them talking about meaning making and that type of stuff, by the time I'm writing those words, it had been like 3 years, I think. It had been like maybe 3 or 4 years since all of that had taken place. And so writing this book even was an exercise in meaning making, not just for that particular incident, but even for like I was meaning making, like you would talk about my grandmother, we talk about her illness and her death, in the second chapter. That was, and that that had been like 25 years ago, by that point. But I was able to make meaning out of that in a new way. Some of the things that some of the incidents and everything that had happened, writing this book was a way of making meaning of those things, because people did just like a lot of racist, ridiculous things. Like you read the book, especially like kind of like the middle section in that book, it gets kind of rough because people are doing some really just horrifically racist things. And so that was writing about it was my way of making meaning of it, because I just don't want to say that somebody saying that President Obama was the Antichrist. I just I'm just like, oh, everything happens for a reason. Like, no, that was something that was just that was so just ignorant and senseless, and even kind of coupled with my own story of this being like a moment, a big moment for me, and somebody kind of just like coming and peeing in the Rice Krispies essentially. Like that was awful, but I was able to then go back and make meaning of that. And so I think that meaning making, whether that's for big things that happen or small things that happen, whatever that looks like, again, it's not saying, oh well, this just happens for a reason, I have to accept it. It's this happened, and you're acknowledging your feelings about it, and then finding a way to say, well, if that pain that I endured isn't going to be for anything, I'm going to make something out of it. And whether that's writing a book, whether that's writing a poem, whether that's doing a painting, whether that's saying a prayer, whether that's going on a brisk walk and hitting a personal record, whatever it is, you can take it and say, this is it, and this is the meaning that you get to give. What I love about meaning making is that you get to say what it means.
That's right.
You don't have to check with anybody else. You can say what it means.
I think that what your meaning making in the writing of this book is deep theological reflection to me. It's beautiful.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And maybe you just answered what was going to be my last question to wrap things up. And again, for our listeners, we've been talking to Allie Henny, whose book is called I Won't Shut Up. Because you write in the book, despite everything you went through with that experience in the church and stuff, you said, I've remained Christian even after my experience in the white church, because I don't blame brown-skinned Jesus for white people's racist behavior. So maybe as we wrap up today, what would your parting words be today for those that are listening, that maybe Black, Indigenous, people of color that are listening to this podcast, those that are struggling to stick it out in the church with Christianity, with faith? I mean, we talked a lot about meaning making for a moment, and that's a big part of it. But what would you want them to hear that are listening today?
It's okay to question. It's okay to reject. It's okay. It's okay to walk away. You know, the way that Christianity has been inflicted upon many of us, and it was inflicted on a lot of people. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a decision. And so we've been handed something culturally that some of us are in just because, you know, it was inflicted on our forebears. And so it's okay to question that, and it's okay to be angry about that, and it's okay to take time away from it, and it's okay to reject it. But if you're somebody like, and I shouldn't say but, that I don't want to sound like, oh yeah, but, you know, if you're like me, like that, it's not that, it's not that, like but if you're on my level, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say it that way. But if you're someone who, you see meaning, you see beauty, you see things that are valuable and important to you, resources that are valuable and important to you as a Christian, and you want to hold on to that, you don't have to let these folks take something away from you that means something. And so we can hold the duality and the multiplicity of colonizers were colonizing, and we're out here inflicting Jesus upon people in a way that he did not consent to. That's the thing too. If we're gonna be real, people were inflicting I'm gonna get real deep theologically here, but I think about the Eucharist and people being inflicted to take the Eucharist. That was an assault on the body of Jesus, also, like that, because we're receiving Jesus's body and blood. So if people are being forced, Jesus is being forced. Jesus is being harmed. His body and blood literally are being harmed in that. But Christ in the Eucharist, in baptism, and however you want to see and believe and conceive of that, he is present with us despite all of the negativity, all of the colonization, all the ugliness that people did. And this isn't a case of like, oh well, you know, like, again, everything happens for a reason. Oh yeah, look, well, you got the gospel now, so even doesn't matter. That is not what I'm saying.
Don't get us started.
That is not what I'm saying at all whatsoever. But what I'm saying is that, like, you know, despite what these people did, despite how they used and misused and abused our forebears, we get to participate in Christ. And we get to participate in his love, and we get to be with him, and to understand, and not just Jesus, but the Spirit, but you know, the God, our parent. We get to participate in that, and we don't have to have whiteness mediate that. And so whatever that looks like for you, if you're holding on, you know, don't be afraid to connect to some of those ideas and some of those things, and find ways to bring your indigeneity or your Blackness or your Latinidad or your Asianness or whatever it is, whatever cultural and ethnic things that you have. Don't be afraid to bring that into your Christianity and allow that to inform you. And if you have to let your Christianity go, like, I'm not gonna be here like, oh well, you can't let that go. I mean, I get it. But if you're wanting to hold on, if you're like me and you've wanted to hold on, don't let these people take something away from you.
Good. Thank you that's a great way to wrap up our time together. I know we could go on and on. Allie Henny, the book is I Won't Shut Up, Finding Your Voice When the World Tries to Silence You. Thank you for being with us on the Vicar's Crossing, Allie.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you.
And again, thanks to Allie. We really appreciate the time and the gift of this book and her voice. It's been a wonderful conversation. That wraps up our first episode of season 10 of the Vickers Crossing podcast. Again, thanks to our sponsors, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. Our thanks to the Diocese of Huron, and of course to our good friends at Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And thanks to my good buddies Kevin and to Ian. I'm Rob Henderson. And thanks for being part of the Vickers Crossing today.
Amen.
And remember, Kevin,
What?
Look both ways. Look both ways.
Before you cross the street.
Booyah.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!